Great. We will get started then. The Columbian Editorial Board is pleased to welcome candidates for state senator from the 17th Legislative District. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor, and I will let the other board members introduce themselves. Craig.
Hi, I'm Craig Brown. I'm the Columbian's editor.
Hi, Craig.
And Scott.
Scott Campbell, the former publisher of the Columbian, retired recently, still on the editorial board.
And then Callie.
Hi there, I'm Callie Hare. I cover politics for the Columbian. I'll be observing and reporting on this meeting, but I won't be participating.
So great, thank you.
Am I showing on the screen? I don't.
And let's see, looks like we lost Linda's camera.
Uh-oh.
I still see.
Well, I have. Oh, yes.
Okay, I'm here. I don't see myself though.
Yes,
there we go.
There you are.
Back. Okay, I still don't see myself.
And as mentioned, we are recording this. We occasionally have technical difficulties, as you can tell. And so sometimes I have a bad connection where I am. So if I ask you to repeat something, I apologize in advance. So then we'll move on to the candidates. Why don't you take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourselves and explain why you were running, and then we'll get into specific policy questions, and we'll start with Daniel.
So great, thanks, Greg. I really appreciate you guys spending time with us this afternoon. Very important. Reading all of the different endorsements and interviews over the last several weeks, it looks like the 17th district is right here at the tail end. And as everybody knows, ballots drop this Friday, and I'm on the ballot to be the state senator for the 17th district. First of all, by way of introduction, I am a dad of 2 amazing middle school daughters. Me personally, I've been a social worker for over 20 years. And my wife, Bethany Rivard, is an award-winning teacher in the Vancouver School District. Our story is like so many others in our community. We had our first daughter in 2007, and then another daughter 2 years later, while also caring for my wife's high school-age sister, who lived with us when her mom passed, and she really had nowhere else to go. But at the same time, the 2008 financial crisis hit us hard. And we struggled to pay bills, pay for childcare, medical, and our family had to make some really difficult decisions. And eventually we lost our house, but through hard work, dedication, we dug out, we got back up on our feet, and our experience is just like so many others. We understand really firsthand what families are facing, especially in the midst of this pandemic and crisis that we're all experiencing. My wife and I, we've dedicated our professional lives to supporting our community. I've spent my entire career counseling children who have been abused, helping adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities live and reach their full potential, and improving our healthcare system, our social safety net system. I've created innovative programs to help those suffering from mental illness and addiction. I built coalitions across Southwest Washington and the state of Washington to address the needs of families and those who are most vulnerable. And honestly, with a really healthy dose of humility, if I'm elected to be your state senator, I'm going to be the voice for families, those who are most vulnerable, and provide leadership we need in Olympia to deliver results for our community. I'm motivated to be on the ballot by what I have seen, not just over the last year, but in the preceding years. We have a lot at stake in our coming years. Healthcare is on the ballot, economic recovery, climate change, improving our educational systems, transportation. And it's well past time that we have a consensus builder, a leader, someone who deeply understands the needs of our community and those that are vulnerable. We deserve that here in the 17th district, and the folks in the 17th expect it. They also expect leaders to speak out against vitriol and the politics of division and the relentless partisanship that does not solve one single problem that we face. So I'm really looking forward to more discussion this afternoon. I really appreciate the time that the Columbian has put into their taking opportunities to listen to candidates and to answer questions about our policies and the critical issues we're facing, and sharing with the voters really how much we appreciate this community and how I will approach politics with my extensive experience in Olympia.
Great, thank you. And Lynda?
Well, thank you so much for having us on today. I think I'm looking forward to this. So I am Lynda Wilson. I am the state senator for the 17th Legislative District. I've been your senator for the last 4 years, and I was in the House for the first 2 years after that, or before that. I am a native Washingtonian. My dad chose to retire here after a long career in the Air Force, and so when I was 12, he decided Vancouver was it. And so I'm a military brat, is what they call this. So, and that was a long time ago, if you do the math. That was back when the 162nd only had a 2-lane road. So, the entire time that I've lived here in Clark County has been I've pretty much been in the 17th district, outside of about a year and a half. And I went to Evergreen High School and was in the entire Evergreen School District the entire time. I am married to a wonderful man of 35 years, and I have 3 beautiful daughters, and very strong and independent daughters, I should say, too, and 5 awesome grandkids. When I started this gig, I had 1, barely, and so we've grown quite a bit. I want to let you know some of the committees that I serve on. I am on Law and Justice, so that will be important this year, and Ways and Means, which is also will be a very important committee because of what we're dealing with the budget and the hole that we have. I am ranking member on the Financial Services and Economic Development and Trade Committee. I serve as the secretary on the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee. And I am on the Joint Committee for Veterans and Military Affairs. I am also on what they call the JLAC Committee, which I'm the co-chair. That is the Joint Legislative Action Committee, which is set to replace the I-5 bridge and having that conversation. I'm one of the original 4 people that started about 5 years ago when John McKibben came to us and said, hey, can we start talking about this again? And so I am our business. We have a small business. We've been around for 61 years, and so and been very involved in the community all these years. Even my father-in-law was involved with Little League and all that. So that that goes across all partisan, no partisan. It's it's just kids and having fun. And I think we're going to be working on a lot of the budget and the hole that we have and all. And I think that because I'm a business owner, I offer a lot of insight into what can happen with the businesses and how we need to be getting out of it. I have the perspective of a small business owner. And so I think I think that's going to be important this go round, this next session. And I'm looking forward to getting back to this to work. I'm looking forward to my voice being heard again and being back in session. And anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity this morning.
Great. Well, thanks again to both of you for joining us. And before I move on to a question, Lynda, I want to check, you mentioned several committees that you are on. Is that more committees than most senators are involved in, or is that a standard number?
Well, I think, you have to, they ask you to be on them, and then you can decide whether you want to or not. Sure. So no, not really. I mean, I've been on most of these for quite some time. So. Okay,
I was just curious. Yeah. So let's move on. You both mentioned the pandemic and the obvious economic pressures that is putting on the state. How should the legislature address that? And we'll start with Lynda.
Well, first of all, we've been asking for several months now to get back to a special session because we have 147 members that would really like to have their voice being heard at the table. Now that's not happening. I know that we've written many, many letters on behalf of businesses to encourage movement one way or the other, trying to help businesses get back on their feet and suggesting a lot of ideas. I was actually appointed to the governor's business recovery task force and met for about 5 or 6 weeks, and man, the information that came in there about how to get back to work was amazing. When I just like hairdressers alone came back with a 12-page document that they created so that they knew what they needed to do to get back to work. And so, and we had 8 members, and 7 of those members were business owners. And so we had some great ideas. And so in getting back to what we need to do, we're going to just have to be at the table and have long discussions. We do have a hole in the budget, and it's going to have to be addressed. And it'll be interesting to see how we do that.
How would you recommend addressing that hole in the budget?
Well, I think that, we started off with, there's certain areas where you cannot cut from the budget. I think there's about 70% where the budget cannot be cut. And that part really, there's 56% of the budget really where it's required by law. But there's certain areas that you just can't touch it. And so when you look at, we have to figure out how to expand that safely, and we have to make sure that our safety nets are there. So what we don't want to do is do the blanket 15% across the agencies. That isn't a smart way to do it, because there are certain safety nets that we need to be looking at. And so I think that when you look at the amount, like we can't touch K through 12. We wouldn't want to touch that. And that's like 52% of our budget. So, and then there's other areas that can't be. But, we might look at a B&O tax cut in different areas. But, it's going to be difficult. But being on the Ways and Means Committee, it'll be great to listen. I think that's really what we're going to have to do, is listen very hard to hear what others have to say and make their case for certain areas. We have a huge budget. It's $52 billion. So, that's 20% more than we had in 2019-21. That's 20% more than the budget before. So we continue to spend, and I think it'll be good to look. We just have to live within our means and try to figure out how to not cut where we don't want to. And
well, and now, but the latest forecast is a $4.5 billion shortfall between now and mid 2023.
Right.
So there's a shortage of revenue. You mentioned perhaps a B&O tax cut. Isn't that going the wrong direction?
I guess it depends on how you look at it. If you have a tax cut and you're helping businesses get back on your feet, that's where your revenue comes from. That's why we had a $1.6 billion more last year than we expected, because business was doing great. And so I think if the economy, if the government will help the businesses out, then they will in turn be able to start creating more revenue for the state. And we've done great over the past 3 or 4 years. The budget has just grown because we've done so well. So I think it's unprecedented times right now. It's hard to say exactly how it's all going to go, but we've seen businesses become innovative and very entrepreneurial. And so I'm hoping that we can make sure that we don't overregulate businesses to the point where they can't do that, because that is where our revenue is going to come from. And because this is a short-term thing. We just have to get back to work, and then, it'll happen.
Danielle, how should the legislature approach the budget?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to approach it, Greg. And first off, I just want to start by saying, when I think about this, I think about the virus. How do you create more cash into small businesses, hospitality industries, and circulate those dollars throughout the community? And the key to that, the connective tissue to that, is getting control of the virus. Here in Clark County, we continue to see that needle move all the way to the right now. And that is going to continue to slow down the economy. And until we get that figured out, we're just sitting on a pile of demand in certain sectors of our economy that will get cash flowing back into our economy and increase revenues for the state. We have, as you pointed out, the delta was originally at about $9 billion, and now we're at about $4.5 billion based on the recent revenue forecast. And we'll get another forecast here in November. When you take the rainy day fund, you're talking more along the lines of about $1.6, $1.4 billion delta over a 2-year biennium. I want to take the approach of let's wait and see what the federal partnership is going to look like. We are not the only state in the country that is going to be dependent on partnerships with our representatives in Washington, D.C. They have proven to be a backstop. They have proven to provide cash influxes into communities that have really kept small businesses, families, renters afloat and able to continue to have some basis of economic activity, albeit much, much slower. So there is this opportunity for pent-up demand to be released into the economy if we get the budget, if we get the virus under control. That is paramount. Health and safety of the consumer market is critical. So do we have to have a wait and see approach? That would be my tactic and my strategy right now.
Now, let's say hypothetically, if tapping into the rainy day fund, let's say that we need to come up with another 1.5 billion. Would you advocate more towards cutting services or increasing revenue? What would be your approach?
I'm sorry, Greg, was that question towards me?
Yes, I'm sorry, Daniel.
Well, again, I think it's a hypothetical question. So I think there's got to be some sort of zooming back and saying, we got to deal with what we have right now. And right now, we don't know, right? We do not know going into the next biennium until the November forecast exactly what we're going to be looking at in terms of big picture over the biennium. So to answer your question on the hypothetical situation, I think the agencies have some diligence to do. I think the legislature has some diligence to do around what those temporary sunset maybe opportunities are to freeze or to lower some spending in terms of how we close that delta. But in terms of what I would be projecting and what I think the economy is going to need that backstop of cash to be able to flow through the economy to build revenue for the state and to continue to go back towards what we were in a robust economy prior to the COVID pandemic. But I take it back to that same point. We can't do any of this until we get the virus under control. That is what is stalling our economy. That is what's stalling the free motion of people to and from school and to small businesses and to the hospitality industries and certain sectors. There's also certain sectors, Greg, that are really thriving. And so we need to be able to look at those sectors as well and lift those and continue to lift those up.
Now, I'm curious, and actually we'll talk more about the virus in a minute. Lynda, is there any scenario, would you support tax increases to help close the budget gap?
I'm kind of a no. No, I wouldn't. You know, and I guess I would like to also mention that in that forecast that we had, Steve Lurch mentioned that they didn't include the B&O or the Boeing, the situation, because they didn't know at that time. And so, you know, they're our largest employer. And so I'm concerned that that's going to create another hole. I mean, there's a lot, because there's so many businesses up there that depend, or, you know, their supply lines for them. And so, you know, I'm worried about that. So it's hard to say. I mean, we could start moving forward and then wind up going back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So,
sure. Daniel, is there any scenario you would support a tax increase?
You know, Greg, it's a great question. And despite the literature that I see that comes in through my mailbox and other forms of communication that comes out of Senator Wilson's campaign, I have never advocated for a tax increase or an income tax, and I appreciate your asking that question and being able to go on the record with it.
Okay.
Although I would like to point out something.
Go ahead.
So you did mention, though, that you would support the wealthy tax so that the wealthy pay their fair share. That typically means an income tax.
That, unfortunately, Senator Wilson, that has never been something that I've said.
Okay, well, that was in your League of Women Voters response. Okay, written.
Let's, Daniel, how would you assess the governor's response to the virus? And you talked about getting that under control. What else needs to be done?
Well, you know, as I've mentioned before, I think the opportunity that the governor uses science and data and facilitated what he knew at the time to be listening to experts. I think he made some pretty tough calls and made the right decisions, and I continue to support the governor in those decisions. We've learned a lot. I think, when the sector that I work in terms of how we went about getting protective personal equipment for folks, I think there's been a shortfall in that. I think there's been some missed opportunities in terms of what I mentioned earlier, in terms of other sectors that were opening up a little bit earlier. And I think that there's still, room for further discussion. But all in all, I'm supportive of the governor's decisions, even though I think there were some really tough decisions.
Lynda, how would you assess the approach?
Well, in the very beginning, we had no idea. We didn't know what we were dealing with. We had no idea what this virus could do. And so I think in the very beginning, I think we did the right thing. But then as time goes on, I think that, well, for one thing, I would love to go back to session to be able to have our voice. We have never been able to, outside of just sending letters, and even on the Business Recovery Task Force, it was difficult to get through to the governor's office. And so I think that I would like to just keep looking at what we can be doing, but we need to be looking at the metrics, and we have to do this safely. We know that, but there has been collateral damage. I mean, I work on the Tiffany Hill bill, and so I'm pretty up on the domestic violence issues. And so you've got a 30% increase in domestic violence deaths in King County alone. And then you've got, well, I read a Department of Health report the other day, and they were saying that there's 1.6 million people in the state of Washington right now that are dealing with anxiety on a daily basis. There's 900,000 people that are dealing with depression on a daily basis, and that's because we are in the disillusionment phase of of this pandemic and the response, which is they think is, they know what a typical response is, and so they expect to have 124 more suicides in the next couple of months that are going to be directly related to this. So I think we have to look at everything, but we have to do everything safely. There's never a time I haven't said, let's do this and not be safe about it. I mean, heck, as a breast cancer survivor, I'm concerned about this. I mean, I need to be safe. My mother, my 89-year-old mother is fighting lung cancer right now. So we have to be very careful around her. I'm taking it seriously. And so, but I do think that more voices at the table will have better ideas that we can work off of each other and come up with great ideas to deal with this.
Now, have you attended or supported any of the rallies protesting the governor's actions? I know some members of your party have been involved with that.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Daniel, I want to follow up on something she just mentioned. You work in mental health. What about the collateral damage? Would we all be better off if we did open up more quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And I believe that Senator Wilson's referring to the Department of Health surge reports that they're putting out on a weekly basis, as well as on a regular cadence as it relates to the traumatic events that we're experiencing and what the impacts of trauma has on mental health as a collective society. So yes, I've been working in mental health for 24 years, and I've been involved since the very beginning when we got through this crisis and what the mental health, what we're calling the behavioral health surge, which I think is what Senator Wilson is referring to, in terms of the number of people here in Clark County who are going to experience post this traumatic event an increased anxiety, depression, and other unmet mental health needs. They are significant. Again, I think it go back to the reality that this virus is impacting us in so many different ways, and that's what needs to be focused on in terms of how we get that under control. We currently don't have, Greg, the capacity to support the number of folks who are going to have unmet mental health needs in our community. We didn't have it prior, and we're not going to have it again. So when we talk about going back to what our budget delta looks like and what our priorities are going to look like, the impacts on our mental health system are significant. And I actually chair a meeting every 2 weeks to be planful around the behavioral health surge here all throughout the summer and into the spring. as we develop capacity. And I think the other thing we have to remember when we talk about the impacts of mental health is what our workforce needs, what our mental health therapists needs, our school counselors, our family members. These are things that we should be focusing in on investing on because we know it's coming. The data is very clear. The Department of Health projections are and have been rock solid. So there's no debate that we need to be prepared. And as we go into this legislative session, it's really an opportunity for us to refocus our attention, particularly on the amazing community-based mental health providers that we have in our community who are doing yeoman's work right now, adjusted on a fly to switch to telemedicine, tried to make sure that the staff had the resources and the tools they needed. We were shortchanged on PPEs, so in the behavioral health community, and again, in the child protective services communities and other social service agencies, we weren't in that categorical priority for protective personal equipment. And we do a ton of community-based in-home family services. And we weren't able to do that to engage in communities. So we know now that we have those things behind those doors, we have a lot of unmet needs in our community that need to be addressed. So purposeful planning, understanding clearly how our system is built on a foundation that wasn't so rock solid, and the crisis that we're experiencing has exposed just how flimsy that foundation is. And now is the time that we need to double up and make sure that we're paying close attention and prioritizing this need. It is rampant in our community.
Excuse me. We'll move on. I'll give Craig a chance to jump in here. Go ahead.
Sure. What should the state do to aid the response to homelessness in Clark County? Let's start with Daniel.
What should the state do? I'm sorry, Craig.
Yeah. What should the state do to help local response to homelessness in Clark County?
Yeah. So, I've been working on this issue for quite some time. I think the state has a responsibility to do a few things. One, I just want to recognize that we have incredible providers here in our community who are working with those who are chronically houseless, those who are on the verge of homelessness, and those who are doubled up. We have way too many of those in our community, and it continues to grow. That downward pressure on the economy has making this worse. So yeah, the state has an opportunity, I think, to make sure that our housing trust fund continues to be robust, that continues to be prioritized as an opportunity to develop more affordable housing. I think the state has an opportunity, again, to provide not just housing. So we in social work talk about a housing first model, but the state's investment in wraparound services and support services so that the interconnectedness between primary care, housing, education, health and wellness services are all wrapped around an individual so that they not only become less vulnerable to chronic houselessness, but that they have the stability to then continue and to contribute within their community. So there's other opportunities I think the state has with the Department of Health, with the Healthcare Authority, with the Department of Commerce. When you look at those agencies, they're all trying to address a very similar problem at the state level. What happens on the ground is it creates a little bit more confusion about, while we get Department of Commerce dollars to do one thing, the Healthcare Authority is paying or purchasing for us to do another coordinated service. And then we have the Department of Health who's working with other various agencies. That to me is part of the problem that the state, I think, can take a pretty hard look at when it comes to addressing chronic homelessness. But right here in our community, we have the most amazing people who are working on this issue day in and day out. And we need to make sure that we lift those folks up and we make sure we bring those voices of those who have been chronically homeless, who have been on that verge, who went from that one paycheck to living in their car to the table to inform the decisions that we're going to make about this issue, because their experiences will tell the story of what's wrong with the system and how it needs to be improved.
Thank you. Senator Wilson?
Well, when you talk about homelessness, I think that you have to look at its core issue. And that I believe the core issue here is a lot to do with mental illness and alcoholism, or alcohol, the way you, alcoholism, I guess, or the mistreatment of alcohol, and the opioid issues that we have. And I think that we're going to have, this is really where we are failing. We need to have better ways to get to the people, to deal with these types of situations, because we also need, of course, to get the economy back so that those that can get back can, with the ability to work, and then they aren't homeless anymore. But really, I think when you're talking about the chronic homelessness, it is about alcohol and mental illness. And so we do have to talk to, meet with those agencies to see if we can help them get to the people. And we have some good programs that through, the city, and because it's really a city situation for what we can do dollar-wise for the homeless. But it's really needs to be dealt with in a basic level, where we need to help them with the mental illness. I mean, I've talked to moms who are mothers of the mentally ill and what happens with them on the streets, and I really worry about that, because they get to the situation where they're arrested in order before they can even get into the system, and that just shouldn't be. And so I I have women that have come crying to me because they don't know what to do, because they're in a situation where they might be the person taking care of their daughter or son, but they can't do anything about it because no one will take them. We have real issues, and we've got to work on it.
I wonder if you could both address the issue of systemic racism in the state of Washington and locally, and ever since the unfortunate death of George Floyd. What should happen? What should we be doing to address that problem, or do you see it as a problem? Lynda?
Hi. Okay. Okay. I do believe that there is racism, and I believe that people of color still have to contend with their disparities and their bigotry, and it's wrong. I've always thought that it's wrong. I've always been appalled at any sort of racism, and I just don't tolerate it in any form. And when we see it, we should never tolerate it. The thing is, we can't legislate these attitudes. And so we have to start changing hearts and minds. And that's the only way that we're going to make big changes, and start at home, start with our kids. And that's what we have to do. And about an hour ago, I was on a Law and Justice Committee meeting, and we're dealing with that particular situation in the realm of law enforcement. And I've been on that committee now for 4 years, and it's in fact, that I heard a lot of stories today, and it's quite obvious that many people, how they feel. And I think that's what we need to do, is make people feel better, right? And this racism doesn't belong anywhere in our society. And we just have to work at it. Again, there's a lot of things that we have to work on that we just have to deal with. And I think for us, we have to listen. I think that's really a lot of what we have to do, is listen to the stories and why they feel that way, and then how do we fix it? And then we deal with it on every different situation. That's how we deal with it.
Daniel?
Yeah, Scott, you're asking the right question. It's the most, incredibly important. For me, systemic racism exists, full stop. It exists in healthcare. It exists in education, criminal justice, medical care, housing, transportation, business, banking. It permeates every single sector of our economy and our society. Full stop again. I believe that we have been elevated to a responsibility and to a calling by our partners and our allies across the entire state of Washington, here in Clark County and across the nation, that this is the time to not blink, to not look away from what the impacts of systemic racism has been. If you are a person of color, you're more likely to die earlier than if you're not. You're more likely to not have access to health care if you are not. You're more likely to not be successful in school than if you're not. These are all points that bring back not something that started 7 months ago at the point of the pandemic, or 3 years ago, or 20 years ago. We have foundational systemic issues in every sector of our community. Just talk to people of color. Listen to what their experiences are in our community. Listen to how devastating it is to hear elected officials in this community say that it doesn't exist. What that means to my kids, what that means to other families. It is well past time. And I think, Scott, you're absolutely right with the point that you're trying to make in this question, that we have to address it without blinking. We have to address it in a way that when we have systemic issues, it requires systemic responses. It requires allied partnership. It requires us to not only just listen, but to listen for the sake of understanding and then to have collective action. Of course, the state's going to need to address this on a bigger picture, but here locally, we also need to address it. I spend too much time in this community working with those who are beneficiaries of Medicaid, and those who are, because you're a Medicaid beneficiary, you tend to be on the lower socioeconomic ladder. The impacts of systemic racism on the communities that I work with day in and day out are very real. And it's really important that we continue to stay focused on this. I've committed that this is not just a media cycle. This is not just something that happened overnight. When Bethany and I talk to our kids about this, and they're at the age where they're starting to ask a lot of questions about it, we have to make this an intergenerational development and commitment. This is not just about my generation or your generation. This is about all the generations coming together, and especially the younger generation who sees this clear-eyed. There is no gray area in this. This is what we are experiencing, and to say that it doesn't exist is very, very dangerous.
Along those lines, or a related matter, what do you think about calls from some people to defund the police? What does that mean to you, and would you be in favor of that? And we'll start with Daniel.
So I think, I want to take your question with a little bit of a caveat, because defund the police is certainly something that people are using as a way to communicate an effort to make sure that when we look at police budgets, when we look at the appropriations of dollars, when we look at the finite number of resources, for me, what it means is when we take all of that into account, are we appropriating those dollars appropriately to address the issues and the needs of our communities, to provide public safety, to support our law enforcement officers at every point of the process? But to understand, I'm a social worker. I've been out on the streets with cops a lot. In my early part of my career, I was on the streets with cops. Later on my career, I was out on the street with cops. And they know, we all know, that the dollars that they have are for, you need to think about it. You need to think about how those resources get used and appropriated, so that we're not asking cops to do too much. We're not asking cops to be saviors of social services. We're not asking cops to solve mental illness or unmet mental illness needs. We're not asking cops to be able to continue to address chronic homelessness through a law enforcement lens. So what it means is taking a really clear-eyed look at what cops in our community need to address social services and to address social issues that should not be handled in a law enforcement perspective. It should not be a law enforcement activity if you are poor. And unfortunately, or if you have a mental health illness. You see so many folks inside of Clark County Jail. Talk to the sheriff's offices and talk to those folks. They're the largest mental health institution in our community. That's just wrong. So when we talk about defunding, what we're talking about, at least from my perspective, is taking a close look at the local control of law enforcement budgets and making sure that we are appropriating them for the health and safety and the protection of our community, but the bigger picture of the well-being of how do we continue to support what really needs to happen in our community around making sure that folks do not end up in prison or jail because they have a mental health need or because of the color of their skin.
Lynda, what do you think when you hear defund the police?
Well, I don't agree with that. I have met, in fact, about 4 years ago when I was first in the Senate, I actually pulled together all of our police chiefs and our sheriff down here in Clark County because I knew that this was kind of the direction it was going. And so I wanted to have basically a roundtable conversation with them, and they were concerned. They talked about how they are on 24/7, that they are the ones that when they don't know what to do, when the mental services aren't there, like I just mentioned earlier, then they call the police and they have to be there. And so what we talked about, though, was how they appear in the community, right? That they need to have good relationships. We need to know them before we need them, right? I mean, I think that's why when we have the security in schools, they learn to have a good relationship with them and that it's a positive relationship. And I think back when we had the last recession, they lost a lot of funding back then. And so that was where a lot of their community service was. They were out there in the community and being presented in a positive manner. And I think that we do need to look at if we want to do more and bring in other people so that the police aren't the only ones showing up. And I mean, I went out riding with a Clark County sheriff, and we went to a house where there was a teenager standing on a roof and wanted to jump off and kill herself. And, you know, it was amazing to watch how they came together and walked her off. I mean, she was great. But so if you take away the funding of the police, it's gonna get worse. And I think that as well, the areas that need the police the most will be the ones that they won't have that available to them if we start removing the funding for them. I think that we also have to think about, it's a tough job, right? Police and firefighters and all that, it's a tough job. And we actually had a bill in the Senate last year that passed, and well, it got through, but it didn't get written into law. But it was about for officers' mental health and wellness. That we have to invest in their health and wellness because they are sent to the most horrific sites, and they deal with they get burnout very, very quickly. So we need to keep them healthy as well, so that they can respond to different situations in a good manner. So, answer's no.
And Greg, I just want to put a finer point on this because I want to be clear that Senator Wilson is projecting and putting out literature in our campaign, against our campaign, that I am in favor of defunding the police. And I think that is dangerous. That is not what we're saying. And the idea when her team, paid for by her campaign, says that that's what I am doing, it is wrong.
Lynda, is it accurate? Have your campaign materials said that?
I have not said that directly. So I don't know where he's getting that. So
I happen to have it right here. Defund the police. It's paid for by Lynda Wilson.
Well, that's not your name on there. That's just in general that what I'm against. That's what that side of that mailer is. I didn't say anything about you. No.
I think
Okay,
the argument
let's
is pretty clear that kind of rhetoric is quite dangerous to insinuate that your opponent is somehow in favor of defending or defunding the police. And that is not an accurate portrayal of what.
Okay, but this is what's going on in general right now, right? What's going on in Portland and what's going on in Seattle, that's what we're referring to. When you've heard, we've all heard that.
Is what's going on in Portland relevant to the 17th district?
No, it isn't. Well, as long as it doesn't come over to our area, right? But I think that having I've stood up against it. I've said that that it's not the right thing to do, that there's killing over there and they're ruining businesses and that something needs to be done. Right. And if you do, then it's not going to be.
And Greg, this is why it is so dangerous to say that kind of language, because you're correct. Your question assumes that there is not that kind of violence that we see across the river. But the threat and the language that is being used here currently is suggesting that, oh, tomorrow it might be here. And that is wrong. That is not an accurate portrayal, and that is not what our community is asking for at this point in time. We are asking for civility. We are asking to cut through this partisan nonsense because it's dangerous. It's scary. It's not accurate. And I'm a dad. I'm raising my family. I'm working full time in social services. These things pop up into the political space, into the community space, and it's not good. It's not fair for our community to be able to hear these things when they're not true. And it's
not true about that. What's not true that this is happening in Washington state and across the country? That we want to do things to make sure that it doesn't happen here. And that we don't want to defund the police because we don't want that to happen here. Right? What is scary about that? There's a lot of people that are worried about what's happening in Portland and in Seattle. So I'm not sure where you're going with this or why what I've stated is accurate.
Well, I think I go back to Greg's point.
I don't know how low we want to go here in this conversation.
Well, I think we want to move on. Let's go to the next topic. How are you going to vote on Referendum 90 regarding comprehensive sex education in public schools? And we'll start with Lynda.
I will be voting no. So of course I voted no on that in the legislature as well. And I look at this as my career up there in Olympia. I have learned to read not only what's in the bill, but what isn't in the bill. And I think that's what's an important point to make here, that this particular bill is mandated curriculum, which is the only mandated curriculum now in the state. We actually had amendments to add.
Don't we mandate math and English?
No. There's no mandated specific curriculum. So we had actually amendments to have, if you're going to mandate this, then let's mandate English and science and et cetera. But that's, and then the other thing is that the particular curriculum is not in the bill. So we're handing over the ability for OSPI to create the curriculum. And we know what the curriculum is now, but we don't know what it could be later because that's an unelected agency that's doing this. So we're concerned. There's concerns about what the curriculum is already. And then when you take away basically a lot of the local control, which school boards are concerned of right now. So the ability for the local school board to make the decision on the curriculum, which is in the parameters of OSPI, right? You can't go outside of that.
Doesn't each school district decide which curriculum it's going to use?
As long as it's within the parameter of what OSPI is allowing.
Right. Okay. I want to get Daniel. 90.
So yes, absolutely, 100% yes. You know, Greg, I work with kids who have been sexually and physically abused. I work with trauma victims and survivors. I have 2 daughters in the public school system currently. My wife is a teacher. I want my kids and your kids to have every tool in the toolbox to be able to understand and work with their families around what is safe touching. What does it look like to talk to a trusted adult? What are the boundaries of a healthy relationship? So yeah, I am in full support of R90. I live for the last, 8 years in public schools. I support the direction of where we're going with this. These are tools to help reduce the number of victims and survivors of sexual and physical abuse, both here at the local level, but as kids mature and get older, this is something that absolutely I support.
Okay, and we'll move on to the, sorry, I have several things I want to get through, so we'll try and keep it moving. Do you believe that climate change is occurring, and is it a result of human activity? And we'll start with Daniel.
Yes.
And what should the legislature do about it?
Well, I think the legislature and the state of Washington is proven to be a model in the rest of the country that we need to address this head on by reducing our carbon footprint, by developing consistent policies that support both economic growth as well as environmental protections. We prove that to be the case, as folks have talked about here on this call, that we had a robust economy while we were doing both of those things simultaneously. So I think the legislature needs to continue to approach this based on science, based on data, and to continue to be a nationwide leader when it comes to addressing climate change. The decisions, Greg, that we're going to have to make here, this is sort of the end of the road in a lot of ways. My kids are going to be dependent on the decisions that we make as a legislative body over the next several years of whether or not they're going to live in an environment that's going to be cleaner and safer and healthier, and more likely they're going to have a chance to be able to enjoy all of the beauty that we all have been able to enjoy here in Southwest Washington and across the state of Washington.
Sure. Lynda, thoughts on climate change?
So sure, there's climate change. That's nothing static. And I know it sounds cliche, but we all want clean water and we all want clean air. But I think, and Washington State has done a very good job of that. And in fact, I think we are the cleanest state in the union. But I think that the direction of how it's being addressed is not the way to go. I mean, I think even the voters have said that, because the initiative a few years ago to increase the carbon tax was, the voters failed it. And I think that it needs to be outcome based. I think a lot of what we're doing is it's carbon taxes, which raises the cost of energy, which then it gets down to the basic level of who's going to be affected by this most when you raise the cost of everything. I mean, energy, you raise the cost of energy, you're going to raise the cost of, in some cases, gasoline, which that's what, the trucks use to get to places, to get the commerce out there, and then costs go up, because if that goes up, everything else goes up. And I think that the way that it's been addressed now recently has become a revenue getter for the state. It's not necessarily decreasing any carbon. So we need to be thinking about that. And in fact, it's, that bill's been around for a while and it isn't getting passed. And that's an interesting, curious why it isn't, because it is Democrats full on in majority up there and they can't get it through. So I know it's one of the governor's top priorities, but somehow that bill isn't getting through. So
I'm curious, you said nothing is static. Does that mean you believe climate change is caused by human activity, or is it just a natural occurrence?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, we know that pollution comes from the tailpipe of the cars. That's the biggest portion of the pollution in Washington State. So finding to do that, to direct. Well, I guess that's just the answer. I think that, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Scott or Craig, anything?
Can I get you guys to weigh in on latest thoughts on the bridge situation, the seemingly never-ending bridge situation?
Oh my gosh. Would you like me to start?
Sure.
Okay. Well, like I said earlier, I have been on that committee, I guess, for 5 years. And it started back, well, we wrote the bill, right, to get us together because we wanted, John McKibben came to us and said, hey, can we start talking about this again? And so, I thought really it's a great opportunity to have my voice being heard at this table. And so we it was interesting because we had to get together and we had to agree on things, right? Because we talk about this partisanship, and this has actually worked very well because we knew that there was going to be some issues that we wouldn't agree on. So we agreed on about 8 points, and then we wrote the bill. And I'm not saying there wasn't some bad words every now and then creating this bill, but it was a good, robust conversation. And then we moved forward. We had to create trust in this group. And so we've moved forward. We also have to work, repair the relationship with Oregon so that Oregon would come to the table. And we've had a great opportunity to work with them. The meetings that we've had are going very well. And I think we're getting into, it's surprising to me, some of the issues that have come out. It's not as black and white as it appeared to be about 5 years ago. So and we want to stay at the table, right? We know that we need to get this done. And not only that, but we know that we need another bridge after this. And in that bill that we passed, it has the bridge authority to be able to look at other bridges, new construction, and then whatever failing bridges we have. So it's moving along, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Daniel?
Yeah, Scott, I think, if I'm reading into your question a little bit, the I-5 bridge is the #1 priority for this community in terms of infrastructure, and I fully support that. It remains the #1 priority. I am not wanting to prioritize Bridge 3 or Bridge 4 or wherever else we are somehow getting off track when it comes to making sure that we invest here in Southwest Washington in the I-5 bridge replacement. I'm pleased with some of the progress that's been made, and I'm tracking it closely as I can, but I still think that we have the #1 priority is the I-5 bridge replacement.
Okay, Scott or Craig, anything else?
Quick question, Daniel, is teacher pay in Washington adequate?
Is teacher pay in Washington adequate? Gosh, it depends. I think teachers have historically been underpaid and undervalued, not just here in Washington, but throughout the existence of teachers. They are heroes, Craig. I mean, they are. Look at what they're doing right now and the amount of support that they are trying to provide to kids who are distance learning. I know in my house, as Bethany is a teacher, they're working like triple time right now. Not only are they managing just what's going on in life, but they've had to retool their entire, portfolios of how they teach. So teachers are always undervalued in our community. I think there's been progress made. I think that there's been, fair and very in-depth discussions between teachers and administrators around how to increase the pay scale, the benefit packages, the expectations around a variety of different other issues that take place in collective bargaining. But the short answer to your question is teachers are always going to be underpaid because they should be making way, way more money if we place the same value on them. But that's more just hyperbole in the sense that teachers are amazing and they should be valued the same way that a doctor is valued or any other high-paying profession because they spend more time with our kids than probably all of us combined.
Mm-hmm. Actually, and I have a specific question for Lynda. I'm curious, Lynda, if I recall correctly, you're a gun rights supporter. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about the Republican candidate for governor not enforcing I-1639 as a police chief?
Well, I suppose he has the ability to do what he wants to do. I mean, that I don't have it.
Isn't it his job to enforce the law?
Right. I think his point is that he's talking about it being a constitutional, whether or not it's constitutional. And
isn't that up to the courts?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about this court, but 1639 there's several things in 1639 that I think are what bother him. And that is basically like no one under 21 can buy a long rifle anymore.
But isn't that up to the courts?
Well, sure. I mean, if the court, that lawsuit is gone, and I don't know if they're appealing it or not, but they've turned it down. They've said they're not working with that. So, yeah, I suppose.
So
the court said no.
So do you have any problem with the Republican candidate for governor not enforcing the law?
That's in his community. See, that's the thing. I don't have an issue with whether or not he, well, that's a tough situation, because as a law enforcement officer, I suppose, because the law is written a certain way. But what he's saying is that it isn't constitutional. So a sheriff has the opportunity to do that. A sheriff can say, he's got a lot of authority, and he can say that.
So you don't mind if Chuck Atkins decides which laws to ignore?
No, that's not what I'm saying, because Chuck Atkins is a good guy, and they do uphold the law. So, I mean, it's an issue, obviously, because you're concerned about it with him not being able to. I mean, we don't want him to not enforce the laws, of course, right, as a governor. So,
given that, are you going to vote for him for governor?
I'll be voting for him for governor.
Okay.
I can't vote for Inslee. I've dealt with Inslee over the years,
Okay, Craig's got any other questions? Well, okay, we'll move on. Give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any notable endorsements, and we'll start with Lynn.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the conversation that we've had today. I have served my district well over the last 6 years. I believe that my broad life experiences have given me a perspective that makes me both a good legislator and a representative of my constituents. Years ago, I was a single mom, and even though with a full-time job, I had many weeks there where I only had $5 in my pocket, and I didn't know whether it should go into my car for gas or my daughter's diapers. I had a tough time making those decisions, and those were tough times, and I will never forget them. And those experiences always make who you are as a person. I've lived here for 50 years. I know my community well, and my community knows me well. I just recently was awarded the Greater Vancouver Chamber of Commerce Statesperson of the Year Award for my work in the community, especially on the Tiffany Hill Act, which was a domestic violence victim bill that only a few days ago has been an important part of the discussion in the court system in King County area. I'm hearing that there are people are from all across the country, and in other countries are actually contacting me about that law. So many of my bills, or most of all of my bills, have become law that were all unanimously supported by or very close to, and those are issues that were of bipartisan in nature. The domestic violence and mental health for heroes and small business bill of rights, those all were unanimous. So that shows how I can work across the aisle to accomplish good things for Washington and our community. In 6 years, I've learned so much in so many areas that my committees are diverse in nature, which only adds to the broad depth of the knowledge I have in many areas. I'd like to share with you some of my endorsements. I'd like you to note that these endorsements represent the very parts of our community that will be pulling us out of this unprecedented economic downturn. Small business, the National Federation of Independent Business, and those that grow our food, the Washington State Farm Bureau, those that build our homes, the Building Industry Association, those that sell our products, the Washington Retailers Association, as well as those who keep us safe. So Washington Council of Police and Fire and Chiefs, Police and Sheriffs, and the Washington State Patrol Troopers Association. And then there's Stand for Children, who believe all children should have a superior education. My most important, though, endorsement is that of the citizens of the 17th District, who twice elected me and who's recently chosen me to be in the primary by nearly an 11-point spread. I'd appreciate another 4 years as your senator. And if I could, I'd like to take a quick second to, since it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, to remind my women friends to get your mammograms and do your monthly self-exams, and to show your support for those currently fighting the disease. On Wednesdays, we wear pink. And thank you for the opportunity this afternoon.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your time. Dan.
Thank you so much. And I will echo Senator Wilson's advocacy in terms of breast cancer awareness and cancer in general. And I think we all share that same sentiment of making sure that everybody has the appropriate course of actions to prevent it and then to treat. But this pandemic, I just want to talk about, and thank you for the time this afternoon. I'm glad I took my day off of work to be here. But I just want to end really, by talking about the pandemic and the crisis and the struggle that so many families are going through right now. And I think we really continue to be focused on how do we emerge from this stronger. Families and businesses are overwhelmed, and they're gonna need help to get back on their feet. My campaign and my voice is going to be important to ensure that families and small businesses can recover, because I've lived through a lot of periods of great uncertainty. But last, I just want to talk really quickly before I leave this afternoon. My observation of our community is that we are a community that is very, very strong. We are incredibly resilient, and we care deeply about each other. We all care and share some common values around family, around faith, and around community. And we've become connected in very different ways over this crisis, connected to each other in ways that we didn't know existed. And I just want to remind folks that as we emerge from this over the coming months, and it will be more than 1 or 2 or 3 months, I personally am not going to forget the feelings that brought us together. How we looked after our neighbors in a time of significant need, and the amazing compassion that we've all shown to strangers. This is the community that I want to raise my daughters in. This is the community that is strong. And it would be a true honor to earn your vote and be the voice in Olympia to deliver results for this community. And I really appreciate your time. I just want to end by saying, please stay healthy to each other. Take care of each other, and please stay connected to each other as we emerge from this.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks
you.
to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you all.